Imagine a man at the height of fame, adored by millions, yet battling his darkest demons alone. That man was Johnny Cash. By the late 1960s, Cash was a household name known for iconic hits like Ring of Fire and I Walk the Line. His deep, resonant voice and raw, emotional lyrics had made him a legend in the world of music. But behind the scenes, beneath the applause and adoration, his life was spiraling out of control in ways that few could imagine. Johnny Cash wasn't just fighting the pressures of fame, he was fighting himself. The very man who could command a stage with his presence, who could sing with a power that touched the hearts of millions, was secretly drowning. His dependency on drugs and alcohol had taken over his life, leading him down a path of self-destruction. It wasn't just his career that was in jeopardy, his personal life was in ruins. His marriage to Vivian Liberto, the woman he had married before his rise to fame, had collapsed under the weight of his addiction and infidelity. His behavior had become erratic, his health was deteriorating, and his music, the very thing that had brought him so much joy, was beginning to suffer. The pressures of his fast-paced life on the road, the relentless touring, the need to constantly produce hits, it all began to close in on him. He was in a downward spiral, a free fall that seemed to have no end. As his addiction grew, so did his despair. Cash became increasingly isolated, pushing away the people who loved him the most, including his bandmates, friends, and even June Carter, the woman who would later become the love of his life. He was lost both physically and spiritually, and the darkness that had been creeping into his life for years finally took hold. By 1967, Johnny Cash had reached a breaking point. The man who once stood tall, who had weathered every storm thrown his way, was now a shadow of his former self. He had become consumed by guilt and regret. His public image was one of strength and resilience, but in private, Cash was a man haunted by his own demons. The drugs had numbed him, but they couldn't silence the inner torment. He was filled with self-loathing, convinced that he had let everyone down, his fans, his family, and perhaps most tragically, himself. One evening, overwhelmed by despair and consumed by the thought that he could never escape the darkness that had overtaken his life, Cash made a decision that would change everything. He drove to Nickajack Cave, a vast and treacherous cave system in Tennessee, known for its labyrinth of tunnels and deep, dark passages. It was a place where people often got lost, both physically and metaphorically. In Cash's mind, it was the perfect place to disappear forever. His plan was simple, yet tragic. He would venture deep into the cave, so far that he could never find his way out. He wanted to vanish, to end the suffering that had become unbearable. As Cash walked into the cave, the world outside seemed to fade away. The further he went, the darker it became, both around him and within him. He stepped deeper and deeper into the blackness, leaving behind the light and any hope of return. The only sound was the echo of his footsteps and the faint dripping of water from the cave's ceiling. Alone, with no light and no hope, he wandered through the dark, twisting tunnels, each step taking him further from the world he knew. Exhausted and defeated, Cash finally collapsed on the cold, damp cave floor. He lay there, his body and spirit completely spent, ready to give up. He had come to this place to die, to let the darkness consume him. In that moment, Johnny Cash felt more alone than he had ever felt in his life. There was no applause, no fans, no music, just silence and the overwhelming sense of his own failure. He believed this was the end. But in that utter darkness, something profound began to happen. Lying there with nothing but his thoughts, Cash experienced what he later described as a spiritual awakening. It was as if, in the deepest, darkest part of the cave, he found something he hadn't expected: himself. He realized in that moment of despair that he didn't want to die. He wanted to live. He wanted to fight, to make amends, to find his way back to the light, both literally and figuratively. Cash felt a presence in that cave, something greater than himself, something that urged him to get up and not give in to the darkness. He described it as a feeling of forgiveness, of being given another chance. The very place he had chosen to end his life became the place where he found the will to live. It was as if the cave, with all its darkness, had forced him to confront the very things he had been running from for so long. With a newfound resolve, Cash began to crawl back towards the light. The journey out was grueling. The darkness that had seemed so comforting at first now felt suffocating. Every step was a struggle, but Cash was driven by a desire to survive, to see the light again, to reclaim his life. After what felt like an eternity, he finally emerged from the cave. As he stepped into the daylight, it was as if he was reborn. The sun, which he hadn't expected to see again, warmed his face, and with it, a sense of hope began to fill his heart. This moment in Nickajack Cave was a turning point in Johnny Cash's life. It marked the beginning of his recovery, both from his addiction and from the despair that had nearly destroyed him. He sought forgiveness, not just from others, but from himself. He quit drugs, a battle that was neither easy nor quick, but one that he was determined to win. And soon after, in a moment of clarity, he proposed to June Carter, the woman who had stood by him through his darkest days. Their relationship, which had been tumultuous and complicated, became a source of strength for Cash as he worked to rebuild his life. Together, Johnny Cash and June Carter began a new chapter, one that saw Cash return to the peak of his career. He found solace in his music again, using it as a way to express the pain he had endured and the hope he had rediscovered. His performances, which had always been powerful, now carried an even deeper emotional resonance. Fans could hear the truth in his voice, the authenticity that came from having walked through darkness and emerged on the other side. Johnny Cash's journey from the depths of Nickajack Cave to the light of the stage again is one of the most powerful stories of personal transformation in music history. It was a moment that saved his life, his soul, and his music. The experience in the cave didn't just change him, it redefined him. It gave him a new perspective, a new lease on life, and a renewed passion for his art. It was a story of redemption, of finding light in the darkest of places. So, the next time you hear Johnny Cash sing with that deep, soulful voice, remember this: behind every line, behind every note, lies the story of a man who once stood on the edge, ready to give up, but found the strength to turn back and reclaim his life. Johnny Cash didn't just survive, he thrived, becoming a symbol of hope and resilience for millions around the world. His music, forever changed by that moment in the cave, continues to inspire, reminding us all that no matter how dark things may seem, there is always a way back to the light.